When it was the general election and Farage came out with his contract, shall we say, because it was going to be a contract between his party and the voters, that this was going to be his promises and his pledges of what they were going to do. This just wasn't a election manifesto. This was a contract that if you voted for reform, you were signing up to. And that, they were the ones sort of at that point being employed almost by you, the voters, to fulfill that contract. And of course, like any contract, as they always say, the devil is in the detail. And oh boy, were there some real devils in these details that Farage was putting out in this contract. Because, well, as you may or may not know, Farage is a full-fledged free market fundamentalist. He is free market crazy. And his entire contract that he had, or his manifesto that he was putting forward, was described as Liz Truss on steroids. It was Trussonomics, but not as you know it. This was Farageonomics, and it was doubling down on everything that Liz Truss was wanting to do with her mini budget, and probably would have done even more had it been a proper budget. Like I said before, if you thought, Liz Truss's mini budget was bad, imagine what would have happened if she had been able to do a full budget. It boggles the mind what she might have tried to do. But there you go. And of course, we've also heard some of the revelations recently about, from Anthony Sheldon with Truss at 10. So, yeah, we really dodged a bullet on that one. But with, of course, Reform now saying that they want to now really pivot, not only just go after the Conservatives, but go after Labour as well, it seems Farage is now going to try and change the party into a somewhat election-winning machine, meaning that he is now ditching his contract with the people only after 2 months of actually standing on it. There you go. But this is part of a wider movement that is currently going on in Reform UK of Farage trying to change the party and stuff going on inside the party. What he intends to change the party to, I don't know. But ultimately, I think we'll see what form or shape Reform UK takes, certainly over the next coming weeks, months, and even years at this point. But it's well worth keeping an eye on what they intend to do. And, of course, giving a bit of pushback on these types of things, because they are going to have a lot of crazy policies. Trust me, they ain't ditching Trussonomics, and Farage ain't going to get rid of his free market fundamentalism anytime soon. That's for sure. So, before we go diving on into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. Down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there is the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into this. This was in The Independent with the title of Nigel Farage Ditches Reform UK's Contract with the People just 2 months after election. So, there we go. Let's get rid of that. So, Reform's UK's ruthless pursuit of now putting Nigel Farage into Downing Street by 2029 has already had them move on from their contract with the people at the general election just 2 months ago. The party's new chairman has now admitted. Businessman Zaifa Youssef was now brought in by Farage to try and reorganize Reform UK after what the new chair has called a scrappy startup. And this seems very much like, by the way, if you don't know who this guy is, he sort of styles himself after Vivek Ramaswamy. I don't think we've ever really talked about Vivek Ramaswamy, but like that's who he styles himself as someone who he wants to be like. And oh boy, Vivek, if you trust me, there's a lot of other people who are like comment on American politics. Trust me. Yeah. Oh, someone we should be very careful of if he wants to style himself after him. So, He said now that the election was now beset with scandals over candidates and now serious questions of the party's policies. In a wide-ranging interview with the Independent, he said that reform will allow members to ditch their own leader in a new constitution. The party is now being inspired by the French far-left leader, Marine Le Pen, doubling her vote in France. And people who work for the Conservative Party have now been in talks with Reform about coming over. So after Mr. Farage declared himself the leader of Reform again at the start of the election and publicly ditched one policy agreed by the former leader, now MP Richard Truss on air during an interview with the Today programme, that it now seems he plans to go even further. The contract to the people, so called because Mr. Farage claimed that manifestos were considered to be lies, was launched by Mirtha Tidalford, I think that's how you say it, and it was lampooning of a complete Liz Truss economics on steroids. The party promised over £140 billion in tax cuts, including raising the threshold of income tax over to £20,000, claiming that it would find over £156 billion in spending cuts. But there were then serious questions over the mathematics. At the time, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the think tank, said the reforms plans were based on extreme optimistic assumptions about growth, and of course, the sums do not add up, meaning that the manifesto as a whole was problematic. But speaking to the Independent, Mr. Youssef said that the contract with the people should now be considered more as the philosophy of what the party wants to achieve rather than policy details. So that was just philosophy. Following Trussonomics and crashing the UK economy again. Oh, that's just a philosophy that we want to follow, guys. Anyway, when addressing the claims that the sums and the election contract did not add up, Mr. Youssef said they don't add up on the basis that you implement everything in there on day one from arriving in Downing Street. That's fair, but that was never going to be the plan. Oh, so you go in and then you crash the economy. You don't crash the economy on day one. You wait a while, then you do it. Anyway, at the very same time, they saw policies as a top to now help win over from the Tories with no real expectations of winning, a claim that Mr. Youssef acknowledged was very true. He said, "We were very ambitious, as everybody in Reform is, that there was no chance that we were ever going to win or be a party of the government." Youssef insisted that over the coming years, the party will now be putting policy meat on the bone. So we'll see what they come up with. But I'm not expecting much. If that's their philosophy, I'm not expecting them to come up with much. He said, as well as trying to expand on how policies would actually be phased in so that we can demonstrate that we can be trusted with great stewards and guardians of the British economy. So instead of going hell for leather and implementing Trussonomics, we're going to have more a slow motion train crash. Fantastic, guys. He also added that he would be very happy for other parties to, quote, steal reform policies for the good of the country. Reform policies would then remain focused on slashing immigration and cutting taxes because that's all the Conservatives care about. Like I say, this is why the Conservatives are just so panicking about Reform UK, because all the Conservative Party has cared about is slash taxes, slash immigration. That's all they've cared about, and they haven't achieved that because don't really think they understand the government, the economy, the UK as it is. And clearly it must be something else at fault, not their ideas. And of course, Reform basically going to do that. So this is why the Conservatives are losing their mind. But they are trying to do this stuff over policies and ideas that they know, they've seen do not work. So instead of actually asking themselves, do those ideas actually work? Should we still be pursuing those ideas? Which should be a conversation these leaders, or at least these potential leaders in the Tory leadership contest are having, but they're not. And we've talked about that ad nauseum for quite a while. So, ain't going to happen anytime soon. He said this overhaul was now part of a dramatic democratization of the party, which would give Reform members the chance now to throw out their leaders if things went badly. At the moment, Reform UK is now a limited company with Farage as the major shareholder. Mr. Youssef did admit that it was completely unsustainable, withdrawing up a party constitution in a very early period. It'd be very interesting to see what actually is in that constitution. He said, "We are a serious political party. This isn't a pressure group." As Nigel has been on the record, as has Richard Truss multiple times, saying, "Of course, after the general election, we will look at the structure and what was right, what was the right thing to do." So, as we look forward to go now, the one stated goal is now to elect Nigel Farage into Downing Street in 2029, and in order to do that, the party now clearly needs a constitution and it needs a structure fit for purpose. Is Nigel Farage going to be in Downing Street in 2029? No, I don't think so. Especially not based on the philosophy they have put forward for that one. That's for sure. He said, "We have, of course, a huge advantage in the fact that Nigel now is unanimous and has universal support from some members of the right now, and is unequivocal and very clear. So, that we're going to be working on now is a draft constitution, and of course, that will have mechanisms by which leaders can be removed and leaders can be selected." Again, be very interesting to see what actually that is in the constitution. He did emphasize that this was to ensure that the party's constitution was now fit for a long-term future rather than just for the next few months. Youssef's target was to, of course, increase reform votes by 5 to 9 million in 2029. That year will see, quote, significant targets with the English council elections as well as the devolved parliament elections in Wales and Scotland. But he also believes that the biggest problem that the party now has to overcome was the lack of a ground war. That meant that we had absolutely no data like other parties. And also, we had no one to get out and vote operations on the day of the elections. Bear in mind, you've got to remember, Reform UK and the Conservatives arguing over the grey votes. Like, if you look at Reform Party meetings, no one young's in the party. Like, there is no one under 60 in Reform UK. And as we've said before, that is a very, very small, tiny voting block. And once again, why the Conservatives are absolutely focusing almost dogmatically on Reform UK when, really their biggest competition is actually coming from the Lib Dems. But there you go. So he did obviously note that at least 4 or 5 seats the Reform won were only places that had a ground campaign, so it was very, very rudimentary. To try and turn this around, he's set up at least 120 pilot constituency branches already in the hopes to try and increase it to 200 by the time of the party's conference in September. For that, Youssef is looking to the German election this weekend, where the far right for Alternative Germany is predicted to make massive gains, and they did. Also to the recent French elections, which saw Marine Le Pen double her vote from 17 to 34% in just 2 years. He said, "We are a very different party from them, but we live in unprecedented times, and we have 5 years to double our vote." Mr. Youssef also claims that Reform UK's appeal has already now reached the Conservative Party officials working in the central CCHQ office, as well as councillors who have defected. A number of people from CCHQ, including senior people, have now reached out saying that they thought that they are now thoroughly disillusioned with the Conservative Party and the whole bureaucracy at CCHQ and how it is. I mean, I'm used to getting their words here corrupted. They're really tired of it, They really don't see that changing regardless of who becomes their leader, and they don't see how the fundamental program could possibly be resolved. So we've been engaging in conversation there with them. And yet they're going to have the exact same problem that the Conservatives have, decreasing vote share from a very small group of people. And obviously, remember, you win parliamentary elections not on vote share, but on seats. So, yes, Reform UK were able to win seats, but that's because they were entirely focused on these seats. Meanwhile, if you think of the broader electorate, this is where you see these types of parties always fail, because where you see that, where you build out your base from, Where's your home territory? Where's your home turf? The Reform seats are scattered everywhere across the country. They aren't, in very close proximity to each other. This is exactly the same problem that the Greens have, where their popularity is scattered across the country. So it doesn't matter that you get X amount share of votes. It's all about the seats. So we'll see what happens. We'll keep an eye on this constitution when it gets written. But I have a strange feeling that that it's going to be very, very hard to get rid of whoever happens to be the leader of Reform UK. So, as always, we'll see what happens there. But as always, until next time, we'll see you all very soon.